Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Marianne Haley, Mimi Haley, with the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, Deputy Director there, and have been working on ending homelessness at colleges and universities for the past few years, and are very excited to be able to have this panel today and to be joined by the group of folks that I'll introduce in a minute. I wanted to start with talking just a little bit about the conference itself and housing equals justice. Amber, if you can advance to the next slide. So we built this year's conference around housing equals justice, and if you've been attending the other workshops, I'm sure you have heard a little bit about that we are really reframing homelessness as an issue of economic, social and racial justice, as well as criminal justice. And we are, have a special emphasis as well on the pandemic, of course, this year, and COVID and the impacts that has had on housing and homelessness. So we are still, we're in day 4 of the conference. We still have some great workshops left this afternoon and tomorrow. So just want to encourage everybody to join us. It's not too late. You can still register. All of the workshops are free. And it is really been an honor to be a part of this and to be able to share this not only with folks across the state of Connecticut, but also across the country as well. We've had a lot of speakers from all over, and if there is, silver linings to be had, I think that's one of them, is that we really, to be able to go virtual and be so inclusive has been great. I also wanted to just mention that we do have a hashtag ATI 2020. If you want to please share this on social media, that would be great. And then we also have a Housing Equals Justice store that you can get t-shirts, masks, and mugs, and it would be available on our website, and you can see the link right there. And last but not least, I want to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Zillow. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to offer this conference for free. So that is a huge debt of gratitude to both of them. And also our workshop sponsor, which is the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities, to be able to bring you this today. So I would like to start with just talking a little bit about 2 of our main presenters, Stacey Havlik from Villanova and Shelley Stoehr. Stacey is an associate professor in the Department of Education at Villanova. She teaches in both the undergraduate and graduate counseling programs. She's also part of the graduate counseling as program director as well. She has a PhD in counselor education from the University of Maryland. And as a former school counselor, which is very relevant for the presentation today, she specialized in training pre-service school counselors and other school personnel to be leaders and advocate to meet the diverse needs of students. So she's very well equipped to be able to bring her expertise to all of our colleges and universities that are participating today, and the school counselors and the folks that have joined us from the education side, but also has an incredible amount to offer from the perspective of our homeless service providers as well. Her research has included academic, social, emotional, career, and college development needs of students experiencing homelessness, as well as first-generation college students. So that is a lot of our young people that are experiencing homelessness fit into that category. She's published and presented research nationally and internationally. She has been featured in national media outlets for sharing her findings. She also is currently a consultant with the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, otherwise known as NACY, the Single Point of Contact Pilot Program, where she provides trainings for states across the country. And we have had the pleasure of having Stacey last fall come to Connecticut and train many of you that might be on this call as well. I also just wanted to say a few words about Shelley. She'll be presenting after Stacey, Shelley Stoehr-McCarthy. has taught English in the Department of First Year Studies at Southern Connecticut since 2017. She was awarded the Outstanding Teacher Award for Part-Time Faculty in 2018 and the Connecticut Board of Regents System-Wide Award for Best Adjunct Teacher in 2020. She's an innovator, and she attended the training with Stacey, and she had an idea for a program in 2019 where Southern Connecticut State University graduate students would help youth experiencing homelessness to apply for college. She since then has had several colleagues at Southern in the English department partner with local service providers and the Y2Y project, Youth to Youth project in New Haven, and Youth Continuum New Haven to develop and implement that vision. And she will be sharing that with us today, as well as bringing with her Joel Dodson, Teresa Montanari, and Jacob Chamberlain from Southern Connecticut. And I will let her do a little bit of those introductions. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, Amber? Thank you. So I wanted to just start to give a little bit of background on our work with colleges and universities across Connecticut. It was in 2016, I presented to a group of Connecticut State Colleges and University deans and basically brought data on our youth experiencing homelessness from our Youth Outreach and Count survey that we do annually, and challenged them to implement a system so that we would be able to, field calls and connect students to one point within the university so that they can get assistance, and it would be more straightforward, called the single point of contact system. But there's many other elements to that, and it's really about developing a system, whether it's called the single point of contact system or a university-wide effort that is visible. It is about understanding the data, how many students on your campus are experiencing homelessness. How do you know that? How do you find that out? How are you collecting that? How are you doing that in real time? What is the research that's out there that, with new ideas and programs that work? How can we collaborate between, our community providers that are often interacting with these students either at shelters or our outreach workers or in our other community services, to partner with the campuses and to be able to bring a holistic approach to this work and to help the students. Also challenging the status quo. That's a lot what we do at the coalition, is to really think about, okay, is this working? And without data and without sort of a plan, it's sometimes difficult to really, consistently challenge that status quo. But what we can see is that, often what we have been doing, needs refining, or we need something completely new. And I think that that's part of what we've been looking at over the last few years. Another thing is to, accountability within the system, like who's accountable for these homeless students. And sometimes I really feel, especially with young people, they fall through the cracks. If they're, in college, is it the responsibility of the community? Is it the responsibility of the homeless service system, the local shelter, or the college or the university to help these students? And, we want to end that. And I think we do that through that collaboration. Tracking is very important. So if a student reaches out, that they're living in their car in a parking lot, what then? Who is kind of making sure that the next steps are taken to make sure that that student gets what they need to be able to, thrive, and making that very, clear how that's going to be done. And then sustainability of any program. So we could have great people like Stacey and Shelley, and we have a lot of wonderful programs that have launched all over the state to address student homelessness. But we want to make sure that they're sustainable and institutionalized as well, so that it's not just, somebody that has taken this on personally, but that this is part of the institution. I just wanted to say a few words. So one of the things that we did, just to talk a little bit about one of those elements, is we partnered with Connecticut state colleges and universities and other colleges across Connecticut during our 2018 youth count to do a specific survey for student homelessness. And we had over 1,900 students that were surveyed, and in the Connecticut state colleges and universities alone, there was over 1,600 surveys that were completed. Of those at Connecticut state colleges and universities, we found that there was an average of 17.5% of the students reported recent housing instability or homelessness. So that's pretty consistent with national numbers that are out there. And I don't want to get into too much data, but there's a lot of also things that go along with that in terms of graduation rates and food insecurity. But it's a pretty striking number. And, you know, in Connecticut, I think we've prided ourselves somewhat on, you know, ending homelessness and, you know, the work that's been done. But this is something that I think we continue to have to address. And it's particularly in the age of COVID now. There are a lot of stories that, you know, hopefully we can talk about when we get to the discussion period as well, of struggles that our students are having. So these are some of this survey is also up on our website, cch.org. And, but I wanted to share with you some of the rates from the colleges and just also say to these colleges that did this work, it was really amazing. In a very short period of time, they stepped up to the plate and they decided, like, we're going to survey and we really want to understand what this looks like on our campuses. And so Gateway found that of the 42 students that they surveyed, that 38% of them were housing unstable or homeless. And you can see the different rates here at each of the universities. Manchester, just to point them out, and Housatonic did, you know, surveyed 320 students at Housatonic, and 19% were found to be experiencing housing instability or homeless. Manchester, also 290 surveys were done, and 14%. Okay, next slide. And this is just a map to show you where those instances of student homelessness were found. So those were just a sampling of some of the higher rates of homelessness, but there was homelessness in all the campuses that did these surveys. And as you can see, it's, you know, spread across the state. There's also a race component. So it was found that 25%, which is, you know, higher than the rate of college students that are on campus of youth of color, students of color. And there is a disproportionality, as there is certainly a disproportionality in homelessness. And a lot of our panels have featured that. That I would really encourage everyone to go check out some of our panels for the ATI conference on race that were just remarkable. So we know that this is there as well. Thank you. Ethnicity, so breakdown, so 33% indicated that they were Hispanic, and this was of the homeless population that were surveyed, so that's a fairly high number as well, and we really need to be paying attention to this and making sure that our services and things that are offered are, you know, reaching everyone. And then we know through a lot of our work with youth homelessness and certainly the national statistics and our statistics that there's a disproportionality in youth homelessness for our LGBTQ youth, many of whom are getting kicked out, tends to be from, you know, very religious families, and the combination of those has created a disproportionality among LGBTQ youth that is in some places up to 40% of the youth population has been designated as, you know, or has been identified as LGBTQ. So I think that you can see here that the students, 71.1% identify as straight. And so there is a disproportionality among LGBTQ students as well. is a place you're staying safe? 24, almost 25% said no, which is an indication that, we would consider that a housing unstable homeless status. And it is a category 4 known in HUD language that if somebody is staying someplace that they are not safe, then that is a homeless situation. So very important. So I know we have Stacey that's going to talk a lot more about this, and I know we've had a lot of McKinney-Vento liaisons joining us, and we've done training between McKinney-Vento liaisons and our SPOCs in Connecticut, which now we have at least 22 SPOCs that we've identified on different campuses across the state. That the federally mandated McKinney-Vento supports, and we had a lot of presentation on this yesterday, that are there for our K-12 students, are not there for college students. And it really, I think, we're trying to kind of recreate something that is going to be like that to assist. So we know that there's college students that are experiencing homelessness in Connecticut. It interferes with their education, and they are often students are not aware of all the resources that are out there for them. So it's not only about identifying and engaging these youth, but also having an awareness on campus that can connect them with all the services and benefits that are available. And, just having worked on a college campus for a number of years, I also know that it's often that, faculty, staff, and, sometimes you don't know what another department has or is offering. So being able to kind of bring that together in one spot to know, what financial aid is available, what work study is available, what kinds of courses might, be better for the student. How can you get help with tutoring if you don't have, funding to pay for it? So there's a lot of things that I think that can go into really surrounding a student with the help that they need. And challenges for homeless students, there's, I touched upon this, but financial means, lack of access to parental information, limited housing options, often can have unmet medical and mental health needs because of their homeless status or housing instability. Their difficulty, they might be trying to work full-time and pay their tuition, and balancing both might be impacting their work as well. They might not have an adult that is giving them advice and support, and just information about those support systems. Okay. So the good news is that over the last few years, there has been a tremendous amount of work that has been done on campuses across the state to establish single points of contact, food pantries, student engagement leadership. Campuses have taken on doing their own surveys. Schools outside of the Connecticut state colleges and universities, such as Albertus Magnus just recently wanted to do a SPOC training and is creating spaces for emergency apartments, working with financial aid departments. Community collaborations have been happening. Shelley's going to talk about that. Joining the local YETI, which is the Youth Engagement Team Initiative. There are 7 of them across the state, and that is a group that works specifically on youth homelessness. And it has been some great partnerships that have been forged around that as well. There's also just mentioning that, schools, I've also seen a number of schools, discover as they're doing this work that they have resources that can be pulled into, that are existing resources that they can utilize to help these students. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Stacey.
Thank you, Mimi, and thank you for having me. It's exciting to be back in Connecticut. Well, not technically, but presenting to all of you. It's exciting to hear all the work you've been doing this year on developing SPOC programs. And let me tell you, working with the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, we're going to a lot of different states and supporting states in developing SPOC programs. And Connecticut is certainly ahead of the game. And so it's exciting to see where you're at. So I'm going to give you a little bit of more background about McKinney-Vento and what that looks like in the college setting, and then offer some suggestions for best practices for SPOC. So first, where does this all come from? The Every Student Succeeds Act reauthorized McKinney-Vento and highlights college and career preparation for students now. And so with the recent reauthorization, now local liaisons and school counselors are tasked with college preparation. I highlighted this word individualized because now that within the federal legislation, it requires local liaisons and school counselors to provide individualized college counseling. And for local liaisons, they have a critical role in the financial aid and helping students get identified, informing unaccompanied homeless youth of their independent student status. So what does this mean for higher education? I recognize today we have folks from secondary and post-secondary institutions here. And so I think that it's important to talk about both and to have both work together, because when you're creating a SPOC system, it's not an individual system in a university, it's a system that goes from a secondary setting and transitions students effectively to college settings. So as Mimi mentioned, there's no equivalent to McKinney-Vento, which has so many supports for students who are homeless in high school, and then all of a sudden they go to college and they don't have a support system. So that's why it's critical, the work you're doing to develop SPOC programs, because students experiencing homelessness are accustomed to having this support of working with a liaison, and they need that extension to secondary and post-secondary settings. As Mimi mentioned earlier, I've done research with school counselors, with local liaisons on supporting students going to college who are experiencing homelessness. And what I hear over and over again in my research is, I wish that there was someone at the secondary setting who I could communicate with and transition to support students in transition. And so this work that you're all doing is critical because it's much needed. And so there's this big opportunity for a partnership between a secondary and post-secondary settings. So when we're thinking about students, just a little bit more background, students who are experiencing homelessness and going to college, youth experiencing homelessness are, as you could imagine, because of the barriers they face, are less likely to enter four-year institutions. They also report intentions to pursue college at lower rates than their consistently housed peers. And this is in line with, so many students who are experiencing homelessness are also first generation college. So they're the first of their family to go to college. And so the numbers are somewhat similar. They're increased with students experiencing homelessness, but that sense of they haven't been exposed necessarily to college settings. So they don't necessarily have the intention to go because they haven't been exposed to it as much as their peers who have consistent housing and who have parents who may have gone to college. They also, the research has showed that they're confused about the college admissions process. And I also think that's right in line with first generation college students. If you haven't been exposed or you're not working with a college counselor, then you don't necessarily understand. I mean, I'm a faculty member working in a college. I work with admissions. I'm a former school counselor, and I get confused about financial aid and the admissions process because it's always changing. So I can't imagine if for a kid who maybe doesn't have parental support or guidance there, it's going to be, it's very confusing. It's very complex. But we think about the strengths of students, and that's always important to consider, is that research has found that students experiencing homelessness see college as a way to get out of homelessness, as a future for them and to overcome their circumstances. And we think about these kids who have experienced homelessness, unstable housing, going to college. I mean, they have so much resilience. It's incredible. So we now need to make our systems to support those students so that they can go and be successful. So when we're thinking about homeless and being in college, research has found that now we're talking, so before we're talking about secondary settings, now we're talking about those who are in college, that obviously, as you can imagine, students experiencing homelessness benefit from going to college. But as I mentioned, the universities don't have systems to identify students. So in high school settings, we have McKinney-Vento and the requirements and the definition, and we don't necessarily have that in higher ed. So the definition of homelessness for McKinney-Vento might look different for different universities. And so identifying students and having a central system is critical for universities, but it's not always in place. More support is certainly needed, someone like a liaison, but oftentimes universities lack those trainings for faculty, for staff. And, you know, those of you that work in a college setting, when colleges oftentimes work in silos. So you have a lot of different offices and so many different people working with different goals and common goals, and it's a complicated system. So it can be hard to know who is going to be responsible, where the support for students experiencing homelessness should be housed, and how to train individuals. So it's not always supportive. And, you know, college just in general, depending where you go, can be a really intimidating atmosphere to enter. And, you know, there's a lot of recent research showing, and Mimi shared earlier, that there are high numbers of students facing homelessness when in college. So when transitioning, there's a struggle to balance school and other responsibilities. There's that lack of adults who can support. We find that students sometimes who are first generation or who are experiencing homelessness, their parents, if they didn't go to college, they don't understand why they can't come home on the weekend, why they can't be there to support their family, why they can't be working all these extra hours, because they also have to balance academics. So there's a lot of, so parents can be supportive, but they can also be a barrier for kids. Those who don't have parental, who are unaccompanied, may not have that parental information, which leads to difficulty completing the FAFSA. They may not know the rules with being unaccompanied. Those who don't have access to their parents, but they're not necessarily unaccompanied, or the parents don't have that information, can be hard to apply for FAFSA. And they may not be financially sufficient self-sufficient when they get there, and don't know what support is available. So there's limited research right now on how we're preparing students experiencing homelessness for this transition from high school to college. School counselors, from the research that I've done, I've found that they have to focus so much on basic needs that oftentimes, as you can imagine, the college going needs are put to the side. So they see it as really important, but they're not necessarily able to meet it because they have a lot of other students on their caseload. And so, you know, they need to, that focus, it puts college aside, but it's important, you know, that if liaisons are doing, and oftentimes too, liaisons aren't necessarily trained to do college counseling, but it falls on them. And so how can we make sure that school counselors and college counselors can meet basic needs, and liaisons, but are also supporting the college going, so that students are prepared to move and transition on. So to do so, we have to teach students how to access and help or accept support. So a lot of students, like I mentioned, they're so resilient. They've made it through so far. But we need to tell them that it's okay to seek help, and it's okay to access help, that's a strength. And so helping them to set goals, to apply for financial aid, exposing students. So as I keep mentioning, it's first generation college students. So if they haven't been exposed to college, how do we either send students to college or bring the colleges to you? There are fly-in programs. So if you look, if you Google fly-in programs, several universities, or a lot of universities across the country, offer programs for low-income students of color, or students who are underrepresented in college atmospheres or in college settings, and they'll fly students and cover their flight and their lodging to come visit their campuses. So that's something cool to know if students are interested in universities further away from home. talking to the students about the college experience and what it might look like. I run a first-generation college-going group. Some of the students in our groups are experiencing homelessness, or some are from backgrounds where they've experienced poverty. And so in those groups, we talk about what is it like to be a college student? What are some general challenges, and not just how do you apply? It's, you know, how do you deal with a roommate? What's a syllabus? How do you contact a professor? And provide that tailored college counseling, and then identify a single point of contact. So just transitioning onto single point of contact programs. It sounds like across your state, you're starting to develop these single points of contact, and these people, or these individuals, are designated individuals at each institution. And so if a student is experiencing homelessness and I'm working as a school counselor or a liaison, I know who to contact at the university that they're going. So I contact that person, connect the student, and then when the student gets to the university, they have someone who can support them and prepare them to enter college and help guide them through the process. NACCE has a single point of contact model for universities. So if you go to their website, they have a model that universities can follow and recommendations for developing SPOC programs. So some considerations as you're developing SPOC programs: how do you continue training? What if there are staff changes, particularly at universities? I think this happens pretty frequently, where one person might leave a job or be promoted or move to another department, and then all of a sudden we don't know who that person is, and it's been 2 years and no one's been doing this job. And then when we think about how universities are so big, so how do you connect them when students come into the institution? How do you connect them? How do you advertise this program? Let counselors know before they come in is certainly something to consider when you're developing programs. And just how do you generate a general awareness so that faculty know they can, if I'm instructing a student, I found out they're experiencing homelessness, I know who that SPOC is and I can contact them. If other staff know, within the institution. Another consideration is lack of funding. It's interesting because I feel like the big part of funding for students experiencing homelessness is obviously housing and food. But a lot of what universities do already can support students. So I think that with minimal changes, with minimal funding, you can find support for students, and just things like helping them understand that there's mental health services available, that there's a writing center, that there's academic support, but they just might need one person who can guide them to those processes, or help them access financial aid and connect with financial aid officers, or resource, so that maybe there's scholarships that they missed or housing that they can access. And then lastly, something to think about is how do you define the SPOC at your university? Because there's often role confusion about what that might look like, and what are the responsibilities. So some quick state level examples. In Bark, Georgia, if you check out this website here, it's an interactive map of where youth and liaisons from anywhere can readily identify SPOC programs. So if I'm if I'm a school counselor, I'm doing college counseling, I can look on that website and find different institutions. Pennsylvania has the Field Center Foster Care to College, so they have a SPOC system for foster care, and working towards a homeless one as well, but that's a great resource to see how it can be defined on college settings. Massachusetts is developing a state system and has done combined secondary and post-secondary settings. North Carolina has done a statewide needs assessment for food and housing insecurity. And when I do this presentation in the future, I'm going to add Connecticut here too to talk about what you're all doing. So some university level interventions. Westchester University has a Promise program where they do dinners, they do connection events for students experiencing homelessness and in foster care. They provide year-round housing for students. In Hawaii, the state coordinators meet with the state personnel at universities, so they build that or bridge that gap. In Tennessee, another example, grant students first priority for housing placements so that they're guaranteed placements in the year-round facilities. Texas, an example, has a basic needs center on campus with that has, legal aid, a food pantry, other supportive programs. And lots of other universities are starting to do food scholarships for students and have at that part of their scholarship package, similar to free and reduced lunch programs that students have in their high schools. California has a hunger-free college campuses, so students experiencing homelessness can access SNAP benefits, so they're getting their food covered. Other quick interventions, meal donation programs, students that don't finish their lunch, they can do swipe out for hunger, transition or transportation initiatives, and including housing on applications. I know I'm just about out of time, so let me try to wrap up these last two slides so that we can move on to Shelley and her group. So secondary interventions, I've heard some great programs where, again, it's just building this bridge. So Reading High School in Pennsylvania has a GAP program where the school counselor bridges that gap. She's their counselor from high school and continues with them in college. And just enhancing training, I think, is critical for counselors and liaisons to support that college readiness, and particularly for students experiencing homelessness and first-generation students. So some quick housing examples, and this is really just thinking about free housing during break. Lottery stays, partnerships with housing assistance, rental assistance, providing short-term housing with families in the community who volunteer to take on students, offering beds at a local church. So I think there's a lot of creative solutions to housing. And finally, I think it's critical that we consider the student as a whole. So think about their academic, their social, emotional, and their career in college. And when we're training SPOC and we're training liaisons and school counselors, they're focused on those three areas for the student. Collaborative partnerships are key, and building a system of support where it bridges that gap between secondary settings to college settings is critical. So my contact information is there. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out. And thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. Shelley?
Hi, so thank you, Stacey, and thank you guys for being here. Thank you for having me. My name is Shelley Stoehr-McCarthy, and I'm an adjunct English instructor at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven. I'm here today because of a program that we've initiated at Southern, in which our English students, our graduate English students, will help homeless youth to apply for college. So we are not actually Southern's single point of contact program. We do have a SPOC at Southern, and so our sort of group is working with them, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're interacting with them later on in this presentation. So this began in 2019. I had attended a roundtable of area nonprofits, and I listened to these people present and on services that their organizations offered. And several of them offered services for the homeless and several for youth homeless specifically. But as I listened, I was hearing about what was available in the high schools, and I heard a little bit about what was available in the universities, but I wondered, how are we going to bridge that gap? Because my son just applied to college like a year and a half ago, and as he was doing that, and my husband and I were helping him with it, it occurred to me that if he didn't have two parents who have been through this process, he would have been really stuck. And since we pride ourselves at Southern on our social justice initiatives, I really thought that we could help get homeless youth access to the college education. So I wanted to create something that was sustainable. So the first thing I did was in fall of 2019, a year ago, I started going from person to person to person across the university. I went to leadership, I went to administrators, I went to faculty in my department and faculty outside my department. And I was doing two things. First, looking to get some informal support. But second, hoping to build this network of partners and allies across the university so that, for example, let's say we're going along and something comes up with the admissions process. So now we know that we can just call Alec over at admissions and he'll help us out with that. So that was really important for the sustainability of this. And one of the people that I did speak to on this tour of the university was our Dean of Students, who is our single point of contact at Southern. So our Dean of Students office, they are our single point of contact. Our Dean, Jules Tetreault, is the contact, but the whole office provides services and is trained to provide services for homeless youth. We have this alert system that we've really started working with quite a bit with the quarantine time and the shutdown of the universities. And with this alert system, any faculty, I say staff there, but it's faculty or administrator, can send an alert straight to the Dean of Students office. And the Dean of Students can use that same system to look up some background information on that student and figure out what it is that this student who's at risk could use. What services do they need? So once using that alert system and the combined efforts of faculty and administrators and the DOS, students get identified. And the DOS reaches out, brings them in, and then they're kind of like one-stop shopping there. They're really able to provide whatever it is that student needs to be healthy and successful on campus. And so they can provide housing immediately. They have the training and the authority to adjust the student's financial aid package as needed. We have a lot of food resources on campus. In about 2 weeks, we're opening a permanent food pantry. And we will continue to have our mobile food pantry that currently comes once a week. We have book assistance, there's childcare reimbursement, other grants and types of financial assistance. And we make sure we have a contract with AT&T if a student doesn't have Wi-Fi, which is of course more important than ever now, or other technology, then we can provide that for them. So our first interns. By this time, my colleague Joel Dodson, who's here today, had joined me in my efforts. He and I met with the head of Youth Continuum in New Haven. They're one of the largest service providers for homeless youth in our area. Youth Continuum told us about a program they were piloting called Y2Y, which you had seen on one of Stacey's slides about the program up in Harvard. So Y2Y is youth to youth. And essentially it's a program in which college students will completely run and manage a youth homeless shelter. So with us wanting to put our graduate students in the community to help youth apply to college, this seemed like a perfect fit. And in fact, I just learned that they will have classrooms in the shelter, in the new shelter. So they thought all along that they wanted to have this educational connection. And we're just so glad that we're able to do that with them. But since most of our students at Southern work, and many of them work full-time, we have a large commuter population, and those students have significant responsibilities at home. So it would be really difficult for most of our students to manage a full-time off-campus, on-site volunteer job and still handle their other responsibilities and their full course load. So Joe and I had to think outside the box. We really wanted to be serving youth in the community as well as our own students who also suffer from a great deal of economic precarity. So what we did is we used 2 of our existing internship course shells. One is internship in teaching writing. The other for undergraduates is an internship in professional writing. And so the students work just a couple of hours with Y2Y. It's not really on site now, they're working remotely, but they're working with Y2Y a couple hours a week. And then the rest of the hours for their credit, they are working on campus with an English department faculty member. They also were able to receive some funding. So I'll talk a little bit about it in a little bit when I talk about the students themselves. Next slide. So our first student is a graduate student. Her name is Teresa Montanari. She's a student in the creative writing program, an MFA. And she is receiving she's getting credit via an internship in teaching writing. So we really one of the unique features of this initiative is that we decided that we wanted our students to be integral in the development and implementation of the program. So what Teresa is doing with Y2Y and her faculty mentor is she's developing a workshop for homeless youth in writing the personal narrative. At the same time, she did receive a little extra money for additional research. She's working with Joel Dodson, actually, and researching other program models. She's drafting a white paper, creating a bibliography that we'll use with future course creation, as well as when we're looking at funding. Teresa, do you have anything to add?
Just a little something to add, Shelley. First off, thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity. I just wanted to add, I'm currently doing research on established national practices and models, and it seems many programs I've come across, even with the best of intentions, are born out of this desire for some predetermined outcome. About how writing narratives can provide people who haven't experienced homelessness with a new or unique perspective on what it means to be homeless. Honestly, at times it can translate as slightly artificial or directive driven. While I agree that educating the public on homelessness can be beneficial, I above all think the workshop needs to be established as a safe space and community where students are encouraged to write in any which way they'd like, taking it in whichever direction feels most comfortable and beneficial to them. I want to be sure that this workshop's ultimate goal isn't to extract information to aid me or people like me to better understand. It's for the students to realize the beauty and the inherent creative license that they carry and the gratification of creative expression, whatever form it may take. I would really welcome from anyone who's willing to share any information about this student-centered model or suggestions on how I could foster the kind of open-ended workshop and community I am imagining. Thank you again.
Thank you, Teresa. Next slide. So we also have an undergraduate intern. And we put these interns in place this semester, even though we aren't quite ready to implement the full vision of our initiative, but we did want to start building a relationship in New Haven and getting to know, what is being done currently. And it's also working with our single point of contact and finding out what the university has going on. So our undergraduate is Jacob Chamberlain, and Jacob is receiving credit under an internship in professional writing. Jacob wanted to talk a little bit about his work. So Jacob.
Thank you, Shelley. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. Over the last summer, I conducted a research study on literature written by homeless individuals in the New Haven area. One of the biggest themes I've noticed was that personal narrative and a sense of personal dignity is very often tied to a sense of place. The greater an individual feels identification with the space they're living in, the greater they feel about themselves. So going forward, my work with Y2Y is going to be based on that idea, that we want to create a space where people feel it's not really liminal space, but more of a stepping stone. We want to create policies that are democratic, based in empathy, and give the people who are living under those policies a sense of agency and dignity. We want them to be involved in their own lives as possible. We also feel that a college education is a huge part of that too, whether it's having a place to call home in a campus or just the sense of agency getting an education would give you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. So last slide. Our next steps. So as I keep saying, we're still developing this program. Ultimately, we will have both a workshop in writing the personal narrative that can be taught on site in the classrooms that they will have in this new shelter. But we're also going to develop an SCSU course in writing the personal narrative that will either be taught on our campus or on site, for which high school students can then receive college credit. And we're also working with the mathematics department on them creating a similar math skills course. Because of course, writing a narrative and learning your basic math skills are crucial for getting into college. And then we'll be working on securing funding. We're going to do more outreach to high schools. We want to create ultimately this interdisciplinary work group based in the arts and humanities, in which we would develop and share our pedagogy, our activism, scholarly work, because remember I said that I was going from person to person around the university, and everyone that I spoke to had some sort of personal project or form of activism or something that they were working on that had to do with economic precarity in some form. So we want to get all together and feel that we can do more good work that way. And lastly, we also want to host a roundtable and bring people in from the community as well as educators to share resources and ideas. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was really great to hear also from Jason and Teresa. It brought a little bit of tears to my eyes, I gotta say. It was very moving what you guys are doing and your passion for this. And Shelley, thank you so much for all your work. And Stacey, you know, we're getting there, and you're one of our key partners to help us get there as a state. So really appreciate all of the work that you've done with us so far. So just quickly how you can help. We want to open up, I want to just mention that there's a Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen, so that if anybody has any questions, you can place them in there. We also have a few discussion questions that I think we'll have a couple of minutes for. These slides will be available too, and the recording will be available on our website. But just, you know, very quickly, like how you can help. You can help identify and connect youth that are experiencing homelessness to, you know, someone on campus at the SPOC level. But really everybody should, in the community, should have an awareness, is our goal. Libraries, police departments, we have a lot of different initiatives going on to really raise awareness. And I have to say that New Haven has really been a trendsetter in you know, making youth homelessness be something that they're really tackling as a community. And the Y2Y project has been pretty remarkable in doing that. So the goal is to really help connect youth or students to the supports that they need as quickly as possible. We do have the 211 system, and so that is always available if there are no other resources and the student is in need. So in connecting with youth, we've heard from youth, and it's so important. Again, the Y2Y project and what you're doing is like raising up the voices of young people and students, but we have heard back lots of advice from our youth leaders about, you know, approaching and connecting with youth that might be experiencing homelessness, because there can be a lot of shame and fear involved. So just being very non-judgmental, patient and consistent, you know, asking if they need any help. Don't make promises that can't be delivered. Often, you know, students or, you know, youth that are experiencing homelessness have had a lot of promises broken. So that trust factor is really important. Who are you working with? What are their names? Identify the organization if you're connecting with them. You know, what department are you with? And, you know, have them understand that you're there to help. Next slide. So just creating that safe space, actively listening. This is a little flyer that we developed that's on our website as well. Understand where they're coming from and help them develop a plan that feels right for them. Try not to just kind of impose a plan upon them. That, you know, it's really about, you know, having them lead the way in their own lives and what is going to work. Okay, so some of the steps you can take are also, this is part of the flyer that's available. Spread the word, call 211 as needed, become a partner with us, reach out to us if you're not already. Participating in the local Yeti, which is a big part in New Haven that's run by Tim McGuire, who's with Youth Continuum. Participate in our youth outreach and count, conduct your own surveys on campus. But also distribute, you know, information, you know, within the community and also on your campuses for what do you do if you need help. Okay. Okay, so we had some discussion questions that were there, and we don't have much time, but I'd like to go to this. Shelley, do you wanted to ask Jacob and Teresa, how are you preparing students with unstable housing to go to college? For those working in higher education, how is your university supporting them? Want to kind of open that up and...
Sure. Yes, so as I had said in the presentation, in terms of how we're supporting our students who get here, that was one of the things we really considered when we were thinking about helping homeless youth to apply to college, was that we felt that we also have a responsibility that if those students come to Southern, that they will have sufficient services to meet their needs. And that's why we're working with our single point of contact.
Great. Okay. So what kinds of challenges have you faced in doing this work that might be surprising to you? And how have you addressed those?
Is that for me?
It's really the group, Jacob or Teresa. I think that would be great to hear from you too.
I mean, the most obvious challenges right now are everything that's going on with COVID. So it's been difficult being able to kind of mold and modify our ideas into fitting into the best environment for the workshop, not being able to interact with the guests and the prospective students. So a lot of it is just communicating closely with Y2Y and having a vision, and then hopefully down the road we'll be able to actually go in there and conduct the workshop. So that's the current challenges I've been.
Yeah, that's a big one. Thank you. I want to ask this question: what resources do you need to Stacey? Stacey, if you can share with us from your national perspective, if you had a wish list that you could get to help to end student homelessness, what would that be?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. Wish list is obviously funding. I think, you know, when we go across the state, that's what everyone says. Where is the funding supposed to come from? But I also think, I think in terms of universities, it's often being creative, like finding sources for funding and finding new ways to be creative about housing. So thinking about the capacity of a university and all of the things it can offer, but saving spots for students who are experiencing homelessness or they need additional housing. I also, in terms of resources, I think a lot about the mental health needs of students, which often can be overlooked, and just having more access to mental health support, destigmatizing mental health support, destigmatizing homelessness for students, and enhancing that help seeking, willingness to seek help and be able to provide support.
That's great, thank you. So in terms of the resources you need, I don't want to put Joel on the spot, but he's on our video here, and I'm going to bring him in for the last word because we haven't heard from you at all, Joel. So any resources from the perspective of, you know, a university?
You know, I'm sorry, I had some connection issues, so sorry to be joining late, but I really loved all the presentations, and I think Shelley touched on some of the issues in her talk, but I think maybe part of the answer there is finding ways that the university and the state in supporting the university can leverage money toward research, and to see this as part of a research partnership about solving problems about how we connect the university to the community. The two sources of funding that we were able to find for Teresa and for Jacob were actually research assistantships. And so I think reimagining what research in the arts and humanities could be to be something that could be exploring possible solutions to these partnerships, I think is one way we could draw upon existing resources.
That's great, thank you, Joel. Sorry for putting you on the spot. So we are actually at time now. I wanted to we have a lot of new things coming up. We have a great panel on shelter diversion and a keynote speaker today. The keynotes that we'll be talking at noon around our criminal justice system. So please join us for that. I also just want to mention that we do have a SPOC page on our website on CCEH with SPOC listings that we're asking all colleges and universities that to keep that updated, and we're reaching out periodically to make sure that that's an updated list. And we will be in touch with everyone to continue our work with this. And thank you so much to Teresa and Jacob, Shelley, Joel, Stacey for joining us from Villanova, and Amber, who is behind the scenes running this, the technology for this presentation. Thank you everybody for joining us, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future.